Hey, this is Jamie Rowe from Guardian and Calamity Kills, and you're listening to the Rumors Are True podcast.
Welcome, this is Jeremy Allen Gould, and I'm coming to you today to confirm between God and of man that the rumors you have all heard are true. I started this podcast to have a platform for the bands and artists that I've worked with in the past, as well as new musicians and artists that influenced myself and many others. The Rumors Are True podcast is an opportunity for the artists to tell their story their way. I'm still in the business of confirming rumors. I still love a good conversation, and I still freaking love music. So thanks again for joining me on this journey, and I hope you like what you hear. With that said, the rumors are definitely true.
Silently vanishing, then reappearing, slipping away for a while. Got dematerializing before your eyes. Always a step from my grave.
Hey, thank you for tuning in to this latest episode of the Rumors Are True podcast. My name is Jeremy, and today I welcome Luke Easter. You know Luke from the band Tourniquet. So honored to have Luke on this podcast to talk about his past and, of course, his upcoming future. So I hope you enjoy this latest episode with Luke Easter. Luke, what is up, my friend? Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
Absolutely, man. What is new in your world? What's currently in your world right now?
We just played a tourniquet show, FTB show in Sweden. That went really, really well. It
Awesome.
Was supposed to be the 6 of us, but Guy couldn't make it. So I wound up doing the full 2-hour set, which was brutal, but it was a lot of fun. People seemed to dig it, and it was awesome. We played with David Husvik from Extol.
Oh, nice.
And then Gary, me, and Anna, and Neil on bass and guitar. It pulled out a lot of stuff that we'd never played before, a couple things that we hadn't played in forever, and just went for it. And it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Was it packed?
It wasn't packed. It was. We would have liked to have seen more people, but it was a tiny little town in the south of Sweden, Norrköping. So all in all, it was good. There was a guy that came up from Australia. There was a guy that came over from Brazil.
Wow.
So it's cool. It was like the old days, when people just came from all over. I mean, we played a show in Holland once, and people came from like Russia.
Wow, that is wild.
Yeah, but the love for this band over the years has been, it's been insane. I mean, we've been very blessed that people
That's awesome.
loved us like that back in the day, but that they still are interested at all. So we don't take it for granted. We're very appreciative. We're very
absolutely. That's so cool, man. I love hearing that. You living in Nashville? Staying busy out that way? What do you got going out that way?
I do a lot of freelance graphic design work, branding and merchandising and stuff like that. I sing here and there when I can, and I stay pretty busy. My wife is a preschool teacher. We have a lot of really good friends out here, and making the jump from California to Nashville was a good move.
That's awesome. I've heard that from many people that have made that trek, and I love that area. It's incredible. So much music, so much awesome. The vibe there's great. That's awesome. What area of Nashville are you in?
We're in Hermitage.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Luke, let's talk about growing up for you, man. Maybe some records, some bands, some artists, maybe even some concerts that kind of, pushed you in the direction that you went musically.
I grew up in church, went to Christian school. So early on, my musical exposure was really limited. A lot of like Maranatha music, back Keith Green and stuff like that, which is cool. I mean, I think in some ways I learned how to harmonize listening to some of those, Second Chapter of Acts records and stuff.
Yeah.
But between that and going to a really conservative Christian school, it was a lot of church music. Which is cool, because if you're going to learn to sing, that's really a good way to do it. Those melodies endured, in some cases for, hundreds and hundreds of years for a reason.
Sure.
But as I got older, Yellow and Black Attack was a huge record. That record blew my mind when it came out. But about the same time is when Steve Taylor came onto the scene.
So good.
Meltdown, Clone, and On the Fritz were like huge records for me. I still listen to a lot of those records today. But just that's kind of where it started. And then as I got older, and started having a little bit more autonomy and started figuring out how I could, sneak stuff into the house and not get in trouble for listening to it, branched out. And that was kind of ground zero for all the hair bands, coming up. So a lot of Motley Crue, a lot of Rat. Ironically, I'd always wanted to sing. I've been singing since I was, 4, back, in chapel, in Christian school. But, you listen to like, Michael Sweet. I can't sing like that.
Yeah.
So like, well, I guess I can't, sing in a band. I'll figure out something else to do that's musical. And then Jovi popped up on my radar, and it's not that I sang like John. John was not that kind of, kind of singer. He, was more of a gritty, rock and roll singer type of guy. And so when I saw the video for Bad Name, it was like, I could do that. I could sing like that guy. And that's kind of when I went all in on wanting to sing in a band. I grew up wanting to be John Bon Jovi, and somehow wound up in a metal band.
So you obviously mentioned these records having an influence on you, and you wanting to do that. Did you start at a young age trying to start bands? What was that kind of like for you?
I played in a garage band in high school with some friends. I was the world's worst bass player, and we were probably one of the world's worst bands ever. But those guys, we were already good friends then, and those guys are all still my family, for the most part to this day. It's where I learned a lot about how to, juggle people's personalities and be confident in my opinions, but also be flexible in terms of, just because I think it's this way doesn't mean that the group thinks it's that way. So I learned a lot there, and it kind of ran its course, and, like all garage bands do, it kind of imploded, and I decided I wanted to see if I, could make it as a singer. So like a lot of people in the 80s and 90s, I answered an ad in BAM, and wound up singing for a band out of San Jose, California, which again is really more of a learning experience than anything else. We only played a handful of gigs in the 3 years we were together, but they were all older than me.
Yeah.
And I had never sung in a band before. So I kind of bluffed, you know, I convinced them that we should write before we did anything else. You know, if we start doing covers, we're just going to start sounding like those covers. So let's
Sure.
just like write stuff and figure out what we sound like. And they were like, oh, okay, let's do that. So I was, you know, in the band for like a month before I ever sang a note, you know. And so by that point, it was like, well, I guess here we'll figure this out. And you know, I had the volume. I didn't quite have my sound yet because, you know, I just not done it. But I didn't understand how to sing, so I blow my voice out regularly in rehearsal.
Wow.
And it was the guitar player's mom had done light opera, and so she came up to my shows doing a break me another was not wasn't breathing properly. And it showed me a couple of things, and that was a game changer. I'm not a trained vocalist, but that was basically the extent of my trainings. You know, singing all my life from the time I was a little kid, and then Dolores Wilson, you know, telling me, "Don't do that, do this." And
yeah.
You know, then it all kind of fell into place, and things started. You know, it started me on the path to where I am now.
Yeah, awesome, very cool. Was that band you were mentioning, was that Heaven's Gate? Is that who you were talking about?
Yes. The band, not the Doomsday Cult.
What kind of music was it? I mean, was it heavier, or was it kind of like the Bon Jovi Striper?
When I joined them, they wanted to be like Holy Soldier and Queensryche. I came in and I was all into Bon Jovi and Extreme and, you know, Rat and Motley. I don't know how to describe our sound. We very much wanted to be part of that whole, you know, late 80s, early 90s commercial hard rock thing. But we were kind of all over the map because we had we all had different musical tastes, and we were all at different levels of ability. So sometimes we were trying to do things that we were a little in over our heads. But I mean, if I just had to sum us up, I would just say we were very much trying to be a commercial hard rock band.
Yeah, very cool. Well, let me ask you this: Tourniquet kind of comes into the picture. Bring me through that. How does this happen? You go from Heaven's Gate, and the next thing you know, you're in an established band like Tourniquet. Bring me through the joining of that.
Heaven's Gate had kind of run its course. You know, again, local band. You start, you know, going through, you know, players, you know, people move on or whatever. And again, these guys are still, you know, really good friends of mine. But it had gotten to a point where, for me, I felt like it had run its course and it had gotten as good as it was going to get. And not to like break my own arm and act like I was so good or anything, but I felt like I had more to learn, but I also had more to offer than what I could do in that band. So I quit. And then within about 10 seconds, I was like, oh crap, I don't have a band. I had not been in a band really since I was like, you know, 17. So it you know, it was like, I gotta find something. So I start beating the bushes trying to find out if there's anybody that, you know, I could maybe audition for. Partly, you know, I figured if I was good enough, I'd make the jump, join an established thing and just go. Then I didn't have to start from square one. And then on the flip side of that, I could find out real quick if I wasn't as good as I hoped I was. And, you know, I could cut my hair and go back to school. And in the course of trying to find something, Brian Gray from The Blame.
Love Brian. Yeah, I know Brian.
Awesome. I've known Brian since the Heaven's Gate days. He was playing in a band called Rocks and Pink Cement.
Yeah.
And I was playing at Heaven's Gate, and we would play shows together. So I've known Brian since I was 19 or 20.
Today's his birthday, by the way.
I know. Happy birthday, Brian.
Happy birthday, Brian.
Love you, dude. But I forget what I reached out to him trying to find out because he knows everybody. You know, if you're in a Christian band or a Christian adjacent band and you still have a pulse, you probably know Brian Gray.
Yeah, exactly.
So he tells me, you should try out for Tourniquet. And I knew that the Tourniquet didn't have a singer because I had gone to the NAMM show that year. This was, I'd done a NAMM show in January of 93. And, that was the first time I met Gary Lanier. And that's when I found out Guy wasn't in the band. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a bummer. Well, I hope you guys, find somebody because, Pathogenics awesome. So Brian tells me they still don't have a singer. I'm like, well, I'm not a metal singer. He's like, dude, you could do that. I'm like, I don't think I can. He's like, no, you need to go for it. You need to go for it. Here's Victor's number. Call Victor. So I call Victor and he tells me where to send a tape, and I sent him a tape, and probably maybe a week and a half later, I get a phone call asking if I can shoot down to LA that weekend and audition. And I went down and auditioned and drove home the same night. I lived in the Bay Area and they were down in LA. Drove halfway back that night, drove the rest of the way back the next morning, and I pretty much just walked through the door and the phone rang, and it was Ted and Gary asking me if I wanted the job.
Wow.
And a week after that, I was back in LA rehearsing, and a week after that was playing my first Tourniquet show in Bartlesville, Oklahoma at the Warehouse.
The Warehouse, wow.
Yeah.
What was that like joining an established band like that? I mean, you coming in like you mentioned, oh, hey, this is already an established band. It's not going to be as much work in terms of, getting it out there. But what was that like replacing, the previous singer, and what was that like for you?
I didn't look at it so much as replacing, because I'm a very different singer than Guy is. Sure. Guy brings a lot to the table. He's very creative. He has a very distinct voice. I looked at it more as, he's gone and I'm going to do the job now. And I realize that probably sounds like semantics. Yes, I was replacing him at some level, but I wasn't looking at it like, I was an upgrade or whatever. I just looked at it as these songs need to be delivered. I think I can do it.
Absolutely.
So, some of it was overwhelming because they had, even at that point, fan base was pretty rabid, very dedicated and very into what we were doing. The songs were very challenging. And I had to learn, like a 80-minute set, 75-minute set in a week.
Wow.
And go do it, so, a lot of it was a blur. I was happy to be there. I was, I couldn't have been happier if I was twins, but at the same time, there's big chunks of it that are kind of a blur because it was a lot of travel. It was a lot of work, and it was a lot of just trying to keep all the plates, spinning to make sure things were going right. But, it worked. I don't sing like Guy, and I didn't try to deliver the songs like Guy would, but I tried to pick the parts that I thought people would want to hear and make sure that I did those as close as I could. And then the rest of it, I just tried to make them my own while still honoring the material and not, changing it up.
Absolutely. Well, that's cool. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that was, you had to feel, like you said, you want to put your own stamp on it, but on the other side of things, you said the fan base was rabid. So I'm sure that was a hard position to be in at some point, for you, people to show up and they're like, what's going on? Like, who's this? That type of thing. So I'm sure that was not easy.
It was a little nerve-wracking. I mean, you hope they're going to like you. You assume they're going to like you because they like your band, but it doesn't mean they're going to like you. To this day, there's a small fraction of the fan base that hates me because I'm not Guy Ritter, and that's fine. I kind of get that. There's, I look at this, Pantera reunion that's playing right now. I love Pantera. I love Zakk Wylde. To me, that's not Pantera, but if they're happy with it, I can't say anything about that. So I get fans not necessarily, embracing somebody new, but, I really didn't think about it that much. I just tried to do my job and tried to hold on to my job. Cause doing the first tour was always in the back of my head that, we could get home and they might cut me loose. Yeah. So I just wanted to hit my marks and stay on pitch and remember as many of the words as I could and just, kill it as much as possible every night so that I would hopefully, still have a job when we got home.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you joined the band, and of course you start with that tour. Like you mentioned, kind of having to learn that on the fly. How did that tour go for you overall? Did you feel comfortable? Did you feel like you were, making your own mark?
I'd never toured, so I didn't really have a metric for if it was going well, other than them. I mean, the crowds were responsive, and they seemed to get, bigger, every night for the most part. I mean, you always play somewhere, on a Tuesday night, in Kansas, and, there's fewer people, but
sure.
In general, like, Thursday, Friday, Saturday shows were usually packed, and the crowd, was into it. Some of it was kind of, the buzz aspect of it. It was pre-internet, so nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew what I looked like. They hadn't heard anything. So people would show up out of curiosity. And like that first tour, I could just walk around the venue and
they wouldn't know.
Watch the band and stuff, and nobody had any idea who I was. And then halfway through, the title track from Pathogenic, I'd come out and start singing, and I'm like, hey, that's that guy. So that part was cool because you could kind of, size things up and get an idea of what the crowd felt like before you got on stage. But I really didn't have a metric for how well I was doing. So I just did what I thought I would want to see if I was out there. And as long as, the band was like, hey, that was really good tonight, then I was happy. And if they said, yeah, please don't do that thing anymore, I'd be like, all right, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Awesome, man. Well, so obviously you join the band, you go on the tour. How soon after that do you start working on Vanishing Lessons? And is are you're writing, part of that? Do you have say in that, or is that record already written? What's that like?
I did not write anything for Vanishing Lessons. There's different reasons for that. Some of it was just the way that the deal was structured at the time, the label. There was no, this is how it was presented to me anyway by Ted. There was no upshot because I wasn't going to make anything off of it. And to be fair, I hadn't written anything. They
Sure.
didn't know what I could do. They were more concerned with, you've never even made a record before. Let's get you over that hill, and then we'll figure out, the writing stuff. So, I joined June 93, and we went in the studio to, start, Vanishing Lessons, end of March of 94. And we'd done pre-production for about 6 weeks before that. So pretty much the back half of 93 was just touring, Pathogenic. We did a big 6 week, chunk in the summer, and then we'd do, a couple days here, a fly date there for the rest of 93. And then 94, the first half of 94 was all about Vanishing Lessons. We recorded that with Jim Faraci, so that was a change of producers. They had done the previous records with Bill Matoyer. Mm-hmm. Did a bunch of pre-production. Got to do. I'm happy that I started making records when I did. It was still 2-inch tape. It was no auto tune.
Yeah.
No Pro Tools. You either sing it right or you keep singing it until you do. Did it in a big, legit, old school studio, Rumble Recorders down in Canoga Park, which at the time was owned by the Captain and Tennille.
Oh, wow.
So never met Tony, but the Captain came by.
That's awesome.
And hung out. Yeah, he was like really quiet and really shy, and for the way I understand it, he didn't think any of these, hard rock bands and metal bands that were pretty much who were recording at Rumble all the time would have any idea who they were, or if they did, that they wouldn't like them because of the kind of music they did. So, he was a pleasure. He was super nice.
That's awesome.
And, curious about, what we did. He beat Ted playing ping pong. They played a couple games, and he beat, best 2 out of 3. But, it was a really cool experience. It was like everything that you could want it to be. I didn't have a job at the moment. I was just doing the records. So I was, sleeping at Gary's house and recording all day, and, it was awesome.
That's awesome. Did you feel any sort of pressure in being in the studio for the first time in that aspect? I mean, did you feel like the band was stoked on it? I mean, overall, like, what was the vibe like?
I think, if memory serves, Jim was a little bit nervous when he found out that I'd never done a record. So, we did a couple pre-production demos, basically so that I could get an idea of what it's like being in the studio, and so he could get a gauge of what my skill level was going to be in that environment. Because it's a big difference between, getting up in front of people and singing, and then trying to replicate that kind of vibe when it's just you in a box with, a piece of glass in front of you. But I did well enough. Jim was like, okay, this will work. He can do this. And, so again, it was basically, as long as Jim and the band were happy with what I was doing, then awesome, then I'm good. Cause I had no metric, if they weren't happy, then, what do you want me to do? Tell me what to do and I'll fix it. And so that was, and not in a bad way, not like, oh my gosh, don't hate me, but just in okay, that didn't work. How should I do it so that it does work?
Yeah.
Let's do it that way then.
Yeah.
Again, it was educational,
Yeah, you learned a lot. Yeah.
Learning how to do it, just like I said earlier about just trying to learn how to work with different, personalities and opinions and work, together in a group. It was more of that, I liked that take. Well, I don't like that take. Well, why? Because it doesn't fit with the way it's going to go into, oh, okay, that makes sense. Then we'll do it your way,
Yeah. Absolutely.
And just learning how to get into that headspace to be able to deliver it. So it, sounds like it will when you go out and do it live.
Yeah, absolutely. When you finally heard it done, what were your thoughts? How did you feel about it then? And how do you feel about it looking back on it?
I will always love that record because it was my first record. It's not my favorite of the Tourniquet records I did. And it's not because of the production. It's not because of the songs. I mean, we still do those songs, to this day. If there's any version of Tourniquet playing, we're playing songs from Vanishing Lessons, somewhere in the set. It's where I learned that I don't really like pre-production in a band setting. Not because it's bad. For that record, we had rehearsed all but like one or two songs, exhaustively, tweaking the arrangements, figuring everything out. So by the time we got to tracking the vocals, 90% of what you hear on there is how we rehearsed it. And so to my ear, some of the spontaneity, that I brought in on later records is missing because it's too rehearsed. And I don't know if it could just be me. That's just how my ear, hears it. Other than that, I prefer the remastered version, cause it brought in more of the low end. The record's really compressed.
Okay.
But I mean, those are minor things. I mean, we hear regularly from people that they love that album, so I can't complain. I love that album.
Yeah.
But that's probably the one that I nitpick the most because it was my first.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I can totally understand that. Having played, I'm sure it's hard having played the songs over and over, and then you hear it, and it's just like you need to clear your head a little, and just be able to know, not be so overwhelmed by what you've done for the last couple months, and that's hard to see that.
Every other album we did, I learned the lyric. I'd hear the stuff when I got to the studio to track the vocal.
Oh, cool.
And so you just go for it there. And that's another, that's a whole other thing. I can look at a lot of that stuff and go, oh, I should have done this or I should have done that.
Sure.
But it sounds fresh. It sounds live. It sounds urgent because it's not so thought through. It's like, okay, that's how it goes. Awesome. Let's do that. And you bang out a verse. And it's like, no, let's tweak this line and that line. Awesome. Cool. Moving on. You know.
Absolutely.
And some of it too, again, I'm not a big rehearsal guy. I'm not a big pre-production guy, but I'm older now And so I understand the necessity sometimes.
Sure.
And I'm more experienced. So if I was in that kind of situation now where there was going to be a lot of pre-pro, it probably wouldn't, get locked in my head as much as it did on the first one. But with the first one, not having done it and wanting it to be as perfect as possible, that's what we decided on when we were arranging it and working it up. That's what I needed to do.
Yeah.
So again, it's nitpicky.
Sure.
I love that album, but there's things that I would do differently. But I didn't know any better, and it works. So
Well, and I think that's the charm of it. Like it's the fact that it is imperfect. It is imperfect in your mind, and I think that's the charm of it. How did the record sell? Did it sell pretty well?
I believe so. I don't know what our sales stats were like. I just know that we always did well enough that the label was like, "You want to do what? Yeah, sure, we'll let you do that."
Nice.
So that was always a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do know that by the time we left Frontline, they did not want us to leave. So that tells me that we probably sold well enough for them that we were a priority.
Yeah.
But we toured it. We started touring it before it came out. And we had pre-release copies to sell on the road, and those sold at, like hotcakes. And I know that there's a couple different versions of the Frontline pressing out there. So, I as far as I know, it sold pretty well, and the response was very positive. People liked that record. They responded well to the material live. And, again, a testament to the material that a lot of it is still what winds up in a Tourniquet set today.
Absolutely. Who were you touring with on for after this record? Do you remember?
It was mostly just us by ourselves.
Spot dates and stuff.
Stuff, spot dates, club tours where, some nights you headline, some nights, you roll in and there's somebody higher up the bill.
Were you guys playing with any of the secular bands at all? I know you kind of mentioned just doing your spots, but was there? I know that Tourniquet definitely had a good reputation in terms of the metal world. What was that like for you guys?
We didn't do too much with secular bands on that tour. I do remember we played outside of Dallas, and the bar that we played was where Dime and Vinny hung out a lot, and they were home on a break. Vinny had busted up his arm, so he was like in a soft cast. So we ran and had dinner, and we get back, and we're going in to play the show, and this giant truck with all these lights squeezes into this tiny spot next to us, and we're like squeezing out of our van to go into the venue, and Vinny and Dime climb out. And, y'all band? We're like, yes, sir, we are. All heavy or what? Like, yes, sir. And so, and Vinny and Dime were, over by the bar shooting pool, watching us all night. So
that's pretty cool.
That was a little bit of added pressure,
I'm sure it was.
That was probably the most notable of any, general market band interaction on that run.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. That's a cool story. Yeah, that's so cool. I've heard that. I mean, of course, rest in peace on those guys, but yeah, man, what a pivotal band in terms of Pantera, and just, I'm sure that was very nerve wracking, knowing that, legends are in your midst. So
I crouched down during the drum solo. I'm like behind the back line, like watching. Do they like this? Are they into this?
That's incredible. I love that. Okay, so that record comes out, you play the spot dates and the festivals. When do you start working on, Crawl to China, and kind of bring me through that record and kind of your thoughts on that, looking back on it?
So before we wrapped up Vanishing, did that run, followed that up with an EP, Carry the Wounded.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Which again was, another pivot. Vanishing Lessons, it wasn't that it was more commercial, but it was maybe less technical than the stuff that had come before it. Carry the Wounded was even more so. That was more, hard rock.
Yeah.
And then we followed that up with Collected Works and had what were probably two of the heaviest songs that we've ever recorded were on that record, Perfect Night for Hanging and Hand Trembler.
Oh, yeah.
And so then we followed that up. We came out of that. People were like, is that what the next record is going to be? Like, we're like, yes. And then we do Crawl to China, and it was like, does it sound like those songs? No.
No.
But it's one of those things. I mean, people have asked me over the years, did the label make you do Crawl to China? And no, we never did something because the label said we want to hear X. We'd had some lineup changes. Guy had been out since '93. We parted ways with Gary in '96, not long after Collected Works. And at the time, we'd been signed to a smaller label out of LA. And at the Dove Awards that year, instead of all the normal Michael Dubs and Amy's winning all the Dove Awards, all these younger bands, specifically DC Talk with Jesus Freak, started winning all these awards. And so all of Nashville was like, well, crap, we have to find heavier bands. So somebody at Benson decided that Tourniquet would be a good bet, but they bought our contract. So that was how we wound up releasing Crawl to China on Benson.
Were you bummed on that, or were you cool with that?
No, we were cool with that because the Simi Valley label, it was fine, but they weren't going to have the reach. They weren't going to be able to do potentially as much for us as Benson could have. And Benson, to be fair, Benson treated us really, really well. The first hint they had that we might not be, the type of band they were used to dealing with is they asked, they had an A&R person ask us for demos of whatever songs we were going to do on the record. We didn't work that way, especially by then. I mean, Ted would have his songs in his head, and Aaron and I, that was the first time we wrote something for record. And we didn't demo anything out. Aaron wrote a track, sent it to me, and I wrote the lyric, and then we all got to hear it when we got in the studio. So, and we weren't even that far into the process yet. So what we wound up doing is Ted had a couple riff ideas. We plugged in a 4-track in his living room and basically just made noise and put that on a tape and sent it to Benson. And they weren't terribly happy about it, but we, our contract said that we had creative control, that we got to, what we
that's
wrote,
huge.
what we play, and not like, how you have to, we're just going to do Yoko Ono covers and you're going to love it. It was, we were conscious of the fact that this was a big opportunity for us and we needed to give them a really good record. But it was just they weren't used to dealing with metal people. So we go to the studio, we do Crawl to China, and it was very organic. It was just where our heads were at. I think, and granted, Aaron and I came in after the fact, but I think with Pathogenic, they had pushed as far into the really heavy technical stuff. As we could. So the subsequent records up to Crawl to China, were kind of the pendulum swinging back the other way. It's like, okay, we went really heavy like that. Let's see if we can still keep some of that intensity, but go this way. Yeah. And so that's, what came out of that. And it's funny because, the production is different. And that's the one record that we've done that doesn't have the same guitar sound on, every song has a different guitar sound on it.
Wow.
And it's mixed a little bit, differently. But I would put it toe to toe with any of the other records. There's heavy material on there. There's Bats and there's If I Was There, but Enveloped in Python and the title track and White Knuckle and the Rosary, those are all just as heavy, as any of the stuff that came before. It just came out, in the late 90s when there was a lot more alternative and grunge and stuff. And so I think because the record didn't perform as well as we'd hoped, I think people take that as, the label made them do it and that record, wasn't that good. And it wasn't good because it wasn't heavy. And it's just not accurate. We're proud of that record. That's the record we wanted to make. That's the record we handed Benson and said, here, please put this out. And they were like, oh, wow, we have to put this out. They didn't know what to do with us. That's why we didn't do another record for them. In the middle of ramping up to the launch of that record, Benson got sold to EMI.
Oh, wow.
And so we were all still in California at that point. We'd flown out to they flew us to Nashville. We shot a video. We met all the sales staff. We did all this stuff. We're like, this is it. We're going to be big rock stars. And within a week or so of getting home, it's like, yeah, there's a big UPS strike, so nobody can find your record. And Carlisle just had a hit with Butterfly Kisses, so all the resources that were going to go to your record are now going to Bob. Oh, and by the way, everybody that you just spent the last year working with, they're all fired. They're replaced with people from England who have no idea who you are. And again, I mean, am I complaining? A little bit, probably, because it's like, we could see so clearly what could be, but I mean, that's life. Yeah. Especially in the music industry, stuff just turns on a dime. But we didn't know what we were going to do, and they didn't know what to do with us. And so we didn't want to do another record for them.
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to us, and I mean, it wasn't like a hostile thing. It was just like, well, this didn't work the way that we wanted it to, and I don't think they have any idea how to work a band like us. Maybe we should find a new home. But unbeknownst to us, they were like sitting out there going, we're supposed to do a couple more records with these guys. We have no idea what to do. But we took a flyer. Ted called and managed to get a hold of the president of the record company and just said, hi, we don't want to do another record for you guys. And he said, that's awesome. We don't want to do one with you either. We're going to send you a contract. You guys are done. Like, awesome.
Wow. What a miracle.
We lucked that that's the one record that we got, advanced on, and, that I was involved with anyway, that we saw an advance on. So we were kind of like worried, are we going to have to like pay back some of that money? I mean, it wasn't a ton of money.
Yeah.
But, I was 26 and, didn't have a real job. So it's like, I can't come up with my part of that money and pay it back. I paid rent with that money, So yeah, it worked out. And then that led to us, signing with Metal Blade.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Metal Blade. Yeah. What a established metal label. Very well respected, obviously. How did that kind of come to, and what was that like signing to that legendary label?
So by that point, we were back to working with Bill Metoyer. We did the 2 records with Jim Faraci. We did Vanishing and Carrie. And then we went back to working with Bill for a lot of different reasons. Bill is Bill's the 5th Beatle in Tourniquet. Bill is as much, responsible for our sound as any of the rest of us who've ever been in that band.
That's awesome.
We'd had a licensing deal when Psychosurgery came out, and with Pathogenic, there were Metal Blade versions of both of those records.
Oh, okay.
When they came out. So we had a relationship there. A lot of that was due to Bill. Bill's a producer, but Bill also operates in an A&R capacity. I believe he still does to this day with Metal Blade.
Oh, cool.
So we had a relationship. So when we left Benson, we reached out to Bill and we're like, hey, we need a new home. Can we, could you maybe help us, work something out with Slagle at Metal Blade? And at that point, they were concerned because, Crawl was not as metal as they would like it to be. In the interim, while we were trying to figure out what we were going to do, we've been doing acoustic shows for years, when we would do, fly dates and stuff. So we'd figured out acoustic arrangements for a lot of the catalog. So we decided, well, let's just, do an acoustic record, and we'll kind of do it. We cut it live on the floor. It was all 3 of us in the same room, with baffles and Bill in the control room, and we would just play it live like we were, doing a show. If somebody screwed up, we stopped. We'd roll back a little bit, play into it, and punch in. So takes were basically live takes.
Oh, wow.
But then to entice people, we put a brand new song on it, which was, really, really heavy and really, really brutal. It was trivializing. And, Bill sent that to the Metal Blade people. And like, if the next record is going to be like this, we would love that. So we wound up with Metal Blade, and that, we did. It was cool. Like I was talking earlier about the pendulum kind of swinging. By the time we did Crawl, it was starting to swing back the other way.
Yeah.
And, by that point, Tourniquet was, the core three of us. It was Ted, Aaron, and me. And all of us independently had kind of come to the point where it's like, I just want to do a really, really brutally heavy record again. And, so we all just, we just started throwing the idea, what kind of record do you want to do? I want to do a heavy record. Well, I want to do a heavy record. Awesome. Cause I want to do a heavy record. And that became Microscopic.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about Microscopic. You signed obviously to Metal Blade. You start working on this record. What's the recording like for this? Your thoughts, memories from that time? It sounds like you guys were all on the same page, which is awesome. And of course, being on this new label, what was the vibe like for that?
By that point, it was, in a lot of ways, it was just business as usual. We knew what we were doing. They knew what we brought to the table, and we were working with Bill, so it was, just us locked up in a room for 6 weeks, in some, permutation. I would usually shoot down 2/3 of the way through, and, I'd be there for a week or 10 days, and I'd bang out all my vocals. Cause by then all the bass and drums and basic guitars were down. And at some point we'd start tag teaming. I would, finish a vocal and they would start adding, little, trills and embellishments, and not quite solos, but little lead, pieces around that, and then start doing the guitar solos. So by that point it was, it wasn't like some, revolutionary thing. It was just, I hate to say it this way because it sounds dismissive, but it was like going to your day job.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's a good thing.
This is what we do. What are we doing today? We're doing that song. Awesome. Let's go.
Yeah.
The only deviation on that would probably be Tomb of Gilgamesh. It's got that acapella part at the top. I cracked that whole part out in 3 different sessions before we finally had a take that everybody was happy with. And it's not an easy part to sing.
I believe it.
It's long. It's just the vocal, and it's pitched really quiet. So, I'm in my lower register singing really breathy. I can sing in like my Vanishing Lessons voice. I can sing there all day and stay reasonably on pitch. But when you're singing really quiet, it's already really challenging. And the more you do it, the more tired your voice gets and the harder it is to stay on pitch.
Sure.
So we would finish it. And so that's it. Let's call it a day. Or that's awesome. We finally have it. And then I get back the next day. They're like, we listened to it again, and it's not right. You're gonna have to do it all again. We can't keep any of it.
God.
You have to do the whole thing again. That happened 3 times.
Wow, that's a lot.
But again, you got to get it right.
Yeah, well, I mean, absolutely. But I guess that probably. At that point, like you said, it was business as usual. So you just kind of got, get back on the horse and do your thing. How did you feel when you heard it when it was finished, and how do you feel about it now?
I like that record, honestly. It's another one. The one thing I would do differently, I would have had it mastered differently. That was when CDs finally went, being, you could fit 70 minutes on a CD, and we were like, what? Because up till then it was like 65 minutes, so that extra 5 minutes was like, whoa. But it was also kind of the beginning of like, the quote unquote loudness wars, where, everything had gone fully digital, and so you could just like brick wall things and make it super loud. So we didn't think of it that way, but we just wanted it to be really, really loud. And so, it's not like the one that I always hear about from people as being too loud to where it makes their ears tired is Infinity on High from Fall Out Boy.
Yeah.
That was kind of the apex of the loudness wars, as I understand. we weren't quite there to that point, but if you listen to that record, a lot of the guitar frequencies are squished because we pushed the mastering to such a high volume that there's not a whole lot of dynamic to it. But that to the side, I think it was really a good return to form. I mean, it was the heaviest record that we put out since Pathogenic. And it just, I think it stands up really well. It holds together well. It has a flow. And that's when a lot of the, really, really progressive stuff, started coming out. I mean, there's flutes on there. There's, bouzouki. That was the first time that I recall us having a cello in the room.
Wow. That's awesome.
It was just like, here, maybe we'll have some tubular bells on this song. Okay, yeah, let's do that. Maybe, some hand chimes. Basically, somebody had an idea. Well, let's, do we know somebody that can do that? We'll call them up. Let's see if they'll come over and do it.
That's cool.
So, it was a fun record to make. And we recorded at a place, in Van Nuys. It was a rehearsal studio that was also wired up to record. So while we were working, the Fates Warnings guys were in and out. They were rehearsing and getting ready to go to Europe. Tempesta was playing for White Zombie at the time, so he was there, locked into a room rehearsing all the. So there's just all kinds of cool people coming through at all hours.
That's rad.
And it was just a fun record to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Was Metal Blade stoked on it? Yeah,
Metal Blade loved it. Metal Blade, as I recall, they loved that album. So by the deal at that point, it was a 3-album deal, but they were options. So the first one was committed to, and then everybody had to agree to the second, and then everybody had to agree to the third. So when we told them we wanted to do the follow-up, they were like, yeah, let's do it. Let's make that record.
That's amazing. So, did it sell pretty well?
As far as I know, yeah. Again, it sold well enough that Metal Blade was more than happy to do another record.
Yeah.
And, was more than happy, I never called there. I didn't call there that often, but I never once called there and wasn't able to speak to whoever I needed to speak to. That's always a good sign.
They're like, Luke who?
Yeah.
So, when this record comes out, are you guys still doing the spot dates festivals, or is there any tours in this aspect at all?
We never really did a proper tour after 95.
Wow.
And there's a lot of different reasons for that.
Sure.
But part of it did come down to, the market had changed overall, but specifically in the Christian market, the 90s was, you couldn't walk 10 feet without tripping over, a Christian thrash band.
Yeah.
And by the early 2000s, there was only a few of us still standing, and there was even fewer out of that bunch that were still standing that could still get decent work. And none of us really, could even get arrested in the States. So we figured out that we could, if we were selective and picked higher profile fly dates, regardless of where they were, although they wound up being in Europe most of the time.
Sure.
We'd get more bang for our buck, in terms of, exposure, but we could also make it work, financially. Yeah. So we all had day jobs.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, if we planned it right, we could go to Europe and do like 2 or 3 shows and come home and everything was covered and we still had some, we got some money in our pocket.
It's a win. That's a win.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that was kind of our touring model for a long time. And most of it wound up being overseas.
Yeah.
Germany kept us alive for years.
I hear that from a lot of bands.
Yeah.
For sure. That's awesome. They love metal over there for sure.
Yeah. And they're not fickle. American fans, it's not right, wrong, or otherwise. It's just, it's.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Culture, different mindset. Americans are like, yes, we love hair metal. No, now you hate hair metal, you love boy bands. Hair metal's awful. We love boy bands now. Whereas you go to Europe and it's like, we love hair metal. These are boy bands. We love hair bands and boy bands.
Yeah.
Now this is Britney Spears and the Spice Girls. Oh, we love hair bands and boy bands, and we love Britney Spears and the Spice Girls. And
they're loyal. They're loyal.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So, and that's not a knock on Spice Girls. I love Spice Girls.
Well, let's talk about the next record where Moth and Rust Destroy, obviously start working on that record. Like you said, Metal Blade was stoked to do another record with you. Bring me through the recording of that, your thoughts on it, memories from that time.
That one was probably the most relaxing record I ever made with Tourniquet. At that point, it was just Ted and me. Aaron had left the band for a while, and Ted wrote all the music. I wrote the lyrics on 2 songs, and it was basically the whole record was Ted and me. Marty Friedman played the bulk of the guitar leads. Bruce Franklin from Trouble played a couple of them. But other than that, everything you hear was Ted and me. Ted played all the drums, all the guitars. Ted played all the bass. And yeah, it was the same formula in a lot of ways. It was Ted and me and Bill in a room. This time we were at Ted's house. He'd moved to Milwaukee at this point. It was Ted and Bill and me in the basement at Ted's house in Milwaukee, just making a record. And there was no vocal booth, Bill and I would, both be in cans, and I would stand over Bill's shoulder and sing. And, that was the first record we did in Tools.
Yeah.
Ted had a practice room off of his garage that we tracked all the drums in. We just ran a snake from there. But for the guitars, there was a crawl space under the front steps of Ted's house that was just big enough. You get to the crawl space under the stairs through this little closet in the basement, and we somehow managed to wedge a Marshall cab in there and and stuck a couple different mics in there, ran them up to the head that was just sitting there by Bill. So if we needed to tweak something, they would change that. And it gave the record a really distinctive, sound. I forget what kind of head we used. We rented it from somewhere in town, but, that was when, by that point, everything was tuned down. We'd already started dabbling in that on Microscopic, with some of the tunings getting lower and lower. By Moth, everything was tuned to C sharp. Which is cool because it sounds really heavy and really sludgy. But as a singer, it makes it a lot easier because, you're getting older and your voice starts, pitching down. It's a mixed bag. I'm proud of this fact, but I also am relieved and feel very blessed by this fact. I can still hit like 99% of the notes that I did, like on Vanishing Lessons.
Wow.
Some nights it's harder than others.
Sure.
That intro on Vanishing is a killer, but I can sing most of those notes. But people think I have more range than I probably actually do because the tunings on the record kept getting slightly lower. And by the time we got to Moth, it was pitched super, super low. So no matter what I sang, if I was singing it in a quote unquote metal voice, it was going to sound stratospheric just by nature of the tuning.
Yeah.
So that was awesome, but it also just sounds super heavy, so that's another one. It was just relaxing. We did at the house, we get up, 9 or 10 in the morning, Ted would have his coffee, Bill would be downstairs, editing, whatever for the day before and setting up for that day. And we chit chat about, whatever and talk out what we were going to try and accomplish that day. And then
go do it
downstairs and record vocals and, somewhere around 6 or 7. So, okay, it's, we're done. Everybody has dinner and hang out and, rinse and repeat. So when I finally flew home, I'm like, I don't even feel like I made a record. I felt like I just like.
Or you're in cruise control. You're in cruise control.
Yeah, I was like, I just went and hung out at Ted's for a week. This was like a vacation.
That's awesome, man.
So
what'd you feel when you heard when it was finished, and how do you feel about it now?
Some of the songs, there's different tunings within the song, and some of them were like the pieces were so intricate that Ted and Bill were having trouble bringing it, so you could just play from one part into the other. So there were parts of that record that were put together in mastering. So when I finally heard the finished record, it was like, oh, that's where that part goes. Because there was probably 3 songs that I'd never heard end to end because they didn't exist in that form.
Wow.
So that part was cool. The other part of it, I mean, it was very cool, hearing the co-writes with Ted.
Yeah.
I feel fortunate and blessed I got to write 2 songs with him. And that, again, that's not a knock on Aaron or the songs that he and I did, but they were different. They approached composing, the compositions of them, the melodic structures were completely different. And, being, Ted being as respected as a songwriter as much as he was as a drummer, that was, especially then, felt very huge that he was entrusting me with, these songs and saying, you write these, I'm going to write the other ones. Awesome. I'll do that. So that was very cool. Just in terms of how it sounded, I was happy with the record. I can't ever say that I was going to say I've never not been happy with the record, but that's not entirely true. Up till then, I can't say that there's any of the records that I did with them that I was unhappy with.
Sure.
There, as with anything, there's little things that I might do differently or little things that I would tweak. But no, I was very happy with it. And I think Metal Blade was at the time as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so, the fact that you said, like, being able to write with him, that sounded, I could hear in your voice that meant a lot to you, just to be able to, have your hand on that, I guess I should say. Spot dates after this, still doing that here and there. I know you're not touring, but is that kind of still the thing?
And even that kind of came a little bit later. I'd had a slip and fall accident, knocked out a couple teeth.
Oh gosh.
Surgeries and stuff, but we also had not found a replacement guitarist. And so there was a little bit of a gap between the record coming out and us playing shows for it. But by the time we did, Aaron had been brought back into the fold, and the machine just picked up. But again, it was trying to hit a lot of the summer festivals and doing dates.
That's awesome. Well, let's talk about the next record, Antiseptic Bloodbath. Obviously this is still on Metal Blade, right?
No, that one was our first time being an independent.
Okay. So what led to being independent, and bring me through that record.
So, like I mentioned earlier, our deal was an options deal.
Sure.
And when we notified Metal Blade that we wanted to do album 3, they responded positively. But the budget was not what we had anticipated. And it was not a number that would allow us to do what we needed to do and be able to turn in a record. And they were not in a position where they could up that number.
Okay.
So some of it in retrospect was probably hubris. Fine, we'll just go somewhere else. Because up to that point, we'd never had a problem, finding somewhere to be. So we parted ways. It was amicable,
Yeah.
It was his business. But we went 8 years without being able to find anybody that would sign us. And it's where the whole not touring thing came back to bite us. Because by that point, it was about, what is your attendance like? This is where social media was starting to be a thing now. What are your social media numbers like? And what are your ticket sales like? Because nobody was really, moving units anymore. Everything was pivoting over to streams and downloads. So nobody would touch us because we wouldn't tour. Even ones that would want to sign it, we would love to work with you. We need you to commit to X number of shows a year. And, we would be like, we can't really commit to that.
Yeah.
I could point fingers and say, this one more than others. But, the reality was it was not something that we could do. And so we beat our heads against the wall for years trying to figure out how are we going to do this. and then a long-time Kickstarter.
Yeah.
So we did a Kickstarter and raised the money, and decided to use a different producer again. Again, nothing against Bill, but it was one of those things of, okay, we did these records with Bill, we took a break, we did these records with Bill.
Clear your head a little bit, just get a different perspective.
Clear our head a little bit, but also, we've been out of people's, consciousness
sphere for a while. Yeah.
We need to do something splashy. So we worked with Neil Kernan. He started out working with Yes. He worked with Hall & Oates, at the height of their big breakthrough. But he did a lot of stuff. He did stuff with Dokken, did stuff with Lynch Mob, did stuff with Queensryche. So he's a really cool, diverse resume. But at that point, he'd been doing a lot of work with Nile. So he really understood the whole heavy thing. And so, same thing, we, did it at Ted's house. And, there was overlaps. Ted was there for all of it, obviously, because he lived there and he was kind of overseeing the whole production. Aaron flies in to do, his guitars and his vocals. I fly in the middle of that so that we can tag team whatever we need to on the vocals. And then he goes home and I finish my vocals. But, that is the record. Sonically, I think that's our best sounding record. Everything that Neil did, and again, that's nothing against what Bill has done. Like I said earlier, Bill's our fifth Beatle, and if Tourniquet could never do another record with anybody else except Bill, I would be completely happy with that. Bill is awesome. So much of where I am now as artist, or as I hate using that term, it sounds pretentious, but so much of that is as much due to working with Bill as with anybody else in the Tourniquet, universe.
Yeah.
But, Neil just did things differently. He insisted on recording the drums in a specific room that he really liked because it had a really high ceiling and the drums sound massive. And when I got references of just the drum tracks, no treatment, no mixing, just basically, this is what we recorded today, I was like, my head almost exploded. It sounded so
awesome.
Huge. But it would also, normally you wind up with bleed, because you've got a kit and this drum is still ringing and now you're hitting this drum. What Neil does, it's very time consuming, but it's worth it if somebody wants to make the effort. Before he would, start tracking the full kit, the full session, he would have Ted go around and hit every drum, as hard as he could and just let it ring. And what Neil would do is once the track was done, he would edit that tail onto every signal so there was no bleed. So if this drum is still ringing out, he would pair it up and let it fade out, for real, like it was the only drum that was being hit. So it gives you this really nice separation, but the drums also sound really huge because you're in a big room. So he did things like that, and he would make little tweaks to the amp, from song to song, or even sometimes within a song, he would decide, oh, this part needs a little bit more of this, and he would twist something, and the tracks just took on a completely different life. But I went into that record knowing that was going to be, to my mind, that was going to be the final Tourniquet record. As far as I'm concerned, that was the final Tourniquet record. I know there was another one after I was gone, but Antiseptic was the last real Tourniquet record.
Yeah. You said you knew that in your mind. Were you contemplating leaving at that point? What was your mindset on that?
We'd been gone for so long. It was a lot of work getting that record made. And it felt like it was the end, not in like a bad way, not like, oh, I hate you guys, I never want to work with you. It felt like it felt organic. Like it is, we've had this run and this is the terminus, yeah, it's not like there was any one thing that made me think that. It was just a gut feeling.
Yeah, no, I get that.
This is the final one. There's no more after this.
So, how, looking back on it, it sounds like you're pretty proud of that. You said sonically, and it sounds like you probably made the right move having a different producer, because it was just a different, viewpoint of it, and that made it sound so much better. But looking back on it, how do you feel about it overall?
Sonically, it's our strongest record. There's a lot of it I'm uncomfortable with in some ways. I don't think it's our strongest material overall. But the cover image bothers me, and some of the messaging in the title track. I think that intentionally or not, things got conflated, and we wound up kind of selling this idea that that eating animals is equal to killing Christ for our salvation. And that from the cover image to some of the lyrics and even just some of the stuff that was said in that whole cycle for the release of that record. And we got pushback from people, and rightly so, on that. And it's one of those things that, I mean, even just looking at the layouts and stuff and having some of those discussions with Ted, leading up to the release. And I was not comfortable with some of that stuff, and would say so. And, he would give me his spin. He would give me his explanation. And, at some level, yeah, I could push back, but at the end of the day, by that point, it was basically him calling most of the shots. And, I was welcome to say my piece, but he was going to do what he thought was best. And that record was kind of I hate that I'll use this word, it was kind of the apex for that. It was, that's where it all really came to a head, and was like, nope, this is how it is now. I was like, okay.
How did that make you feel?
It is what it is. I mean, I'd never, even the dynamic now, I mean, I'm working with Gary and Guy, and we're doing, STB. I have an equal say in everything, the same way that Gary and Guy do, but in a lot of ways, Gary is the quarterback, and there needs to be a quarterback.
Sure.
Gary is the guy that can get things done. Gary is the guy that knows how to get a lot of those things done, and and I'm fine with that, because I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to do whatever I can to help execute, but I don't know necessarily how to get the ball rolling. And It was like that as well. I knew my place. I came in late in the game. I wrote it out the longest in a lot of ways, and was last man standing, to a point. We brought, Aaron back in, but, I'd been the number 2 guy, quote unquote, in the outfit for long enough to know that A, I'm good at being the number 2 guy, and B, that's my role.
Sure.
So stay in your lane. And again, not in a negative, demeaning way. But that was my lane. That was my role. So I knew, okay, I can push back, but past this point, it's just going to make problems, and it's probably going to be counterproductive. I said my piece.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I get that. Man.
See that. So I have misgivings about that record. I like a couple songs, but I couldn't even tell you the last time I listened to that record.
Yeah.
Not that I don't listen to my records that much anyway.
I'm sure.
That's the last one I would put on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you kind of mentioned in your mind you thought this would be the final one. Well, of course, there was one after that, Onward to Freedom, which it sounds like Ted spearheaded, for the most part. Kind of bring me through, being a part of that, and I guess your viewpoint on it.
Ted, well, Tourniquet in general, but specifically Ted, always had a pro-animal stance.
Yeah.
Which I was 100% on board with. I think that we're supposed to take care of the world that God gave us, and that includes everything in it, animals, plant, all of it. We have a responsibility to God. We also have a responsibility to people that come after us. I look at it like renting an apartment. If you move, you should leave the apartment
the way you
as
got
good
it.
or better than how you got it. But Ted had written some songs and decided he wanted to do a record that would hopefully generate money that he could donate to animal rights causes. And he was going to do it under the name the Tourniquet Arc, because he had started an online presence on Facebook under that name, which I was honestly thankful for, because a lot of the animal stuff was starting to eclipse, the music stuff in the Tourniquet Facebook world. So he put up this offshoot so that, there would be, another venue that people could just, discuss that stuff. Not that it was, wrong, but we're a band. And we can touch on that, but there's more to us as a band. But if you want to go to talk about that stuff, that's awesome. Here's this venue for you to be able to do that. So he decides to do this record. So, he gets Michael Sweet, he gets Kevin Young from Disciple, the guy from For Today, I'm trying to blank.
Maddie. Yeah.
He gets all these people to do vocals and other people to do guitars and stuff. And so I did an updated version of Stereotaxic Atrocities. And myself and Marty Friedman were on that track. But somewhere along the line, it got retconned, and Ted started telling people it was a Tourniquet record. It's not a Tourniquet record.
Yeah.
Never was, never will be, was never meant to be. It's just easier for marketing purposes.
Sure.
But, at that point I was still, part of things. And, Ted was like, hey, you want to do this song? I think it'd be cool if you put your spin on it. I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. So that was that, and kind of overseeing some of the art direction, on the cover. Because the original version that he got, he wasn't happy with. And I had a friend who, I do graphic design. I know really good graphic designers. I know enough about graphic design to know that I can get the job done, and that I know people that are really, really good at it, that are actual artists,
Sure.
So I hooked him up with a friend of mine, and then I was kind of the go-between, getting it done. So that was the extent of my involvement on that record.
What did that, it sounds like there was maybe some not miscommunication, but just you're seeing one thing, he's seeing another. Did you feel bummed about it?
He said one thing at the outset and then said something completely different once it was released.
How did that make you feel though, overall? Did you feel like not a part of it, essentially?
Well, I never felt like, that was my project, so it wasn't an issue of feeling not a part of it.
Okay.
I was not happy with and not comfortable with what I saw as the double talk.
I get it. And I'm not trying to pry on anything.
No. And I'm not trying to accuse him or anybody of anything. I do think that it's one of those things that, when he announced it, it was, I'm announcing this because I'm really, into this concept right now. And by the time we got to it dropping, it was an issue of, it's going to be easier to market this.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I get what you're saying.
The name is more attached.
Yeah.
But the way that it was executed, I wouldn't have done it that way. And just all of it in the moment. And to be fair, I was in the middle of trying to move from Texas back to California. So, I'm sure some of that, colors my perception of it. But I remember not really being crazy about the execution of it.
Yeah.
But it's a solid record. There's some good songs on it. There's some really good performances from people that I really admire and respect a lot. So
that's cool. Yeah, I get that. Well, let's talk about you leaving the band. Kind of bring me through your thought process and leaving the band at this point. You've been in the band for quite a while. What was that like having to leave? How did you feel about it? And, just kind of bring me through that.
I was in the band just shy of 23 years. And it never crossed I shouldn't say never crossed my mind. At one point I thought, well, nothing's happening. Maybe I should just move on. And somebody smarter than me is like, well, if nothing's going on, then why would you quit? I'm like, well, because nothing's going on. Yeah, but what if you quit and then something does happen? I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'll just, and I was happy that I did, I did, I was happy that I stayed. But in terms of when we did finally part ways, it never would have crossed my mind to leave. I just was informed one day that I was no longer the singer and that there was already a press release written, and there was other things that were not so nice that were said, and it was a shock. And it was, some of the things that were said were harsh enough that I very seriously contemplated not doing music anymore.
Wow.
But I, again, the same much smarter person than me that told me that, it probably wasn't, why quit if nothing going on anyway? Just write it out and see what happens. Talked me out of quitting music altogether. And encouraged me to do my solo record, the Pop Disaster.
Yeah.
Which is something I'd wanted to do. As far back as the Moth and Rust Destroyed days when we started doing shows.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I had told Ted I wanted to do, something on the side. And he wasn't crazy about the idea, but he didn't tell me no. He just asked me to wait until we put out another Tourniquet record, which at the time just seemed, very reasonable. Like 2004, it's like, yeah, sure, I can do that.
Yeah.
Not knowing we wouldn't put out another Tourniquet record until 2011.
Yeah.
So,
that's,
in the meantime, I had, I was learning to write by myself because I'm not a very good guitar player. I'm a singer. And even that, whether I'm good at that is for other people to say, but I can arguably get the job done doing that. So I just, up until around 2007, I realized that I could write songs on my own. I always thought I needed a partner.
wow.
So I had started trying to figure out how to write stuff by myself. My friend Chris, who, honestly, Chris, as much as Brian in a lot of ways, is connected to me being part of Tourniquet. I would never have heard of Tourniquet if Chris hadn't brought home a Stop the Bleeding cassette.
Nice.
Chris played on the demo that I sent to Tourniquet to get my audition. Chris is my brother.
That's
and
cool.
He's my longest running musical collaborator. But we had started doing demos of some of these songs that I was writing. And so, when I told him I'm not going to do music anymore because evidently I suck, and he's like, dude, that's not true. He's like, let me go home and listen to some of those demos. He calls me up. He's like, I listen to some of these songs. He's like, they're worth working up. They're really rough, but we could pick some of them, polish them up and do proper versions.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I've got some more that I'm working on. He's like, cool, finish those and we'll pick what to do. So that's what we wound up doing. So the first song that was ever written that wound up on Pop Disaster was Misspent. I wrote that in, I want to say 2007.
Okay.
And, the last one that was written was the opening track, Life Goes On. That one, people talk about, what's your process? People like, they either come like that or they take forever.
Sure.
That's completely true. That I did a follow-up single, Mystery, that I released in 2021. I had everything but the chorus for that song for almost 30 years. But when we were doing Pop Disaster, I knew that I needed a song that was more anthemic to open it with. I didn't have it, but for a lot of different reasons, there was a time crunch. And so Chris had told me, you have till this day. If you don't have something, we're just going with what we have because we don't have time left to do this other song. I'm like, okay. So I knew in my head, I needed this type of song, and nothing. And it's my wife's and my anniversary, and we were going to Disneyland for the weekend, and I'm standing in line to get on the Southwest flight, and like literally the whole song is,
popped in your head.
And I typed the whole lyric in, to an email, told them I'll be home Wednesday, I'll see you Thursday, we're going to start working on this. And that was it. That was, so it was very cool figuring out that I have my own point of view and my own voice as a musician. And it was really cool to do a completely different style of music and pull it off. I was scared to death that people were going to hate it. That's why I called it the pop disaster. I figured if I made fun of it, that nobody else could really do anything worse. But I mean, I titled that because I was afraid it was going to blow up in my face. Yeah. But the response was overwhelmingly positive.
That's awesome.
People thought I was a decent writer, and that the songs are solid, and they thought it was cool that I did something different. So,
that had to make you feel really good.
It did feel really good. It felt really good because I got my record out before Tourniquet got their next record out. And again, it's not like it was,
no, I get it.
Competition, but I knew, I know what the process was like in that camp. And, it was always in the back of my head that, no, I got to get there first. So that felt good. Yeah. But then for it to also to be well received, felt really, really good. Cause I mean, if I just put it out and got there first and then people said, yeah, this thing sucks, that would have been kind of hollow, but people liked it, so I'm happy about that. And
that's awesome.
It opened up other possibilities. I've gotten to sing on other stuff. I've gotten to sit in with other bands, that I might not have gotten to do so if they only knew me as this metal guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you going to do any new music at all still?
Yeah, that's the plan. I basically have a full album written. It's just a matter of figuring out the logistic with Chris. He lives in California. I live in Nashville. He travels a lot for work. And when we were both in the Bay Area, it was easy enough to just, schedule around when one or both of us was in town. Now we have to schedule around that and get me out to California. So,
well, that's cool. I'm sure it'll happen soon, and that sounds exciting. And I'm happy that you do feel like you have your own voice. I think that's cool. Not that you didn't in the first place, but I'm sure that was, I get where you're coming from.
It's all about being in a band. I liked being in a band. But also part of that was, I just sang. I can't really do anything else, so I need to be in a band, so to be that late in life, to be in my late 40s and putting out a solo, pop rock record and realizing, oh wait, I guess I can kind of do this too, was very validating. And very
absolutely.
unexpected.
That's cool. I love hearing that, man. That's really, really cool. Just wanted to touch briefly on, Ted obviously passed away, and kind of your thoughts. I know you kind of talked about, the ending not being probably the greatest for you guys, but just overall, like your thoughts on him and his death, how it affected you.
The way I describe it, Ted was one of my closest friends up until he wasn't. But that said, I couldn't imagine a scenario where I would work with him again. But it was always in the back of my head that, once enough time had passed and the dust had settled, we'd reconnect and, rekindle that friendship. We'd sit on the phone and watch Dumb and Dumber together, all the stupid stuff that was not music that we used to do. I never stopped loving my friend. I never stopped missing my friend. And he was just gone. And I mean, it'll be 3 years this August, and in a lot of ways it still doesn't seem real. I owe everybody that I've ever played with a lot, just in terms of the experience and the education and the trust, all of that. but aside from my friend Chris that I was talking about, I probably owe Ted the most because I played with him the longest. And I think in a lot of, I mean, there's so much of what I've learned about, you know, how to pace a show and how to build a set list and, how to communicate with, you know, the audience on and off stage. You know, so much of that, I think I had some of it in me instinctively, but I learned how to do it from Ted, you know. So, you know, and just the fact, I mean, I joined Tourniquet when I was 22. By the time we parted ways, I played in that band more than half my life, you know, and the bulk of that was with Ted. So, you know, I don't even know how to quantify that loss.
Yeah.
You know, regardless of how weird things, you know, were at the end, it doesn't change the fact that, you know, he was my friend, he was my bandmate, he was my drummer. I love him more than I could ever say. And, you know, I miss him and still can't believe that he's gone. You know, the thing that takes some of the sting off of it is, you know, as believers, we know that death is not the end. It's just the next step. And, you know, so we have that assurance that, you know, we'll see these people again. And so, you know, I wish we could have, you know, patched things up and reunited on this side, but I know that we'll get that shot, you know, on the other side when it's my time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being transparent with that. I know that's really tough, and I can tell in your voice that, you know, what it meant to you. And I know, you know, life is so short, and we don't, you know, when someone's gone. I just had a friend pass away. I get it. Like, I feel like I just want to text them and be like, "Hey, what's up?" You know, it's an eerie feeling.
Yeah, and it's complicated because, I mean, you know, regardless of who it is, you can either distill them down to their best parts or their worst parts and try and make it easier, but that's not the reality of it. You know, people are complicated, relationships are complex, and, you know, it's just, there's a hole. You know, there's a hole now that where Ted should be and he's not, or where your friend should be and they're just not. And it's not that it gets, you never get over it. You just learn to live with it. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Let's pivot to Stop the Bleeding, the reunion of sorts, you know, just new, you know, Tourniquet-based project. You guys played last year. You just played in Sweden, like you mentioned, and of course you got another show coming up at sometime this year in Ohio. Yeah, bring me through that. How did that kind of come to, and how have the shows been? And I know you played with my friend Devin Chalk on the drums. Love him. He's great. Fantastic. Yeah. Talk me through how this kind of came up.
Well, when Ted passed, Gary and I had reconnected over the years. And when Ted passed, I actually found out about it from Gary.
Oh, wow.
And just talking, and initially we were like, we should try and get everybody who's ever been part of this thing and do a big show. You know, it's the closest anybody will get to a reunion. It'll give us all a chance to, you know, kind of, you know, get some closure, and we can all, you know, say goodbye to Ted. And it seemed like a cool idea. And, you know, we talked about it more than once, but it never seemed to get legs.
Yeah.
And, you know, so then, you know, after a year or so, it was like, you know, okay, I guess we're not going to do that. Devin found out that Gary lived near where he is. And so he reached out and was like, hey, can we meet for lunch? And so they met up for lunch, and just over the course of lunch, Devin throws it out there that if we ever wanted to do something, he would love it if he could, you know, play drums for it. And after lunch, went home and sent a video to Gary of him playing, I want to say Ark of Suffering.
Oh, wow.
Gary sends it to me, and it's like really, really good, you know. And not that I didn't, you know, I'd heard of Devin. I hadn't heard that much of you know, the stuff that he'd done, but I knew that he was, you know, a good drummer. but, some of Ted's stuff is a little bit, otherworldly. So
not easy.
Exactly. So, hearing it being played correctly, was like, wow, he's really good. So I, half jokingly texted Gary back and said, when do we start rehearsing? And then it just kind of grew from there. And, we invited, all of the, the usual suspects to be part of it. And when everything finally locked into place, it was Gary and Guy and me. And, obviously we had Devin on board. And, Gary has worked in musical instruments, in that industry for different companies over the years. So he has lots of connections.
Yeah.
So he knew Anna Santina. She's a killer bass player. She'd done some stuff, on his solo records. She played, on both Flood albums. And same with Neil Swanson. Neil's played with so many, killer people, Dave Stewart, Orianthi, Richie Sambora.
Wow.
Both Neil and Anna are legit. But, Gary's like, I think they'll do it. I'm like, okay, so what do we do? He's like, well, I was approached about maybe a Flood show, but I think it would make more sense if we did a Tourniquet show. What do you think? I'm like, no, I'll do it. And so that's kind of how it all came together. So when we did Immortal Fest last summer, initially that was it. It was just supposed to be one and done, and we'll do all the songs and, people
all good.
Will be happy. Yeah. It won't be quite the reunion they asked for, but it'll be the closest thing they're going to get.
Sure.
And by the time we got there, we had another offer for Sweden. And then within a couple days of Immortal Fest, we had an offer to come back this summer and do, a headlining gig.
Wow.
So, we have things that we would like to do. There's different, ideas that we've thrown out amongst the three of us, what ifs. All of it is it'd be very premature to say that we're going to do, anything specific, but we have a couple other offers for more shows this year. So we're exploring those to see if we can pull that off.
That's cool.
But as long as there's opportunity and as long as people are interested, we would like to continue doing this.
That's awesome.
And we use the name Stop the Bleeding because we kind of can't use the name Tourniquet, but
sure.
We're trying to figure out how we can do that because we would much rather play under our own name than play under, a placeholder name that everybody understands isn't really our name anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but it's cool. When we parted ways with Gary in '96, if you told me that I'd be playing, with him at all, let alone playing, the old stuff, a festival date with him, I wouldn't have believed it, but that's just kind of how God works, right?
Yeah.
We think that we know what's going to happen, and then it's like, no, that's not how it's going to happen. It's going to happen like this,
Yeah.
And so, it's restoration, it's reconciliation, it's all of those things. And,
it's awesome.
It's weird because when Gary and I reconnected, it was like, no time had passed. We just picked up exactly where we left off, and, we work well together. We get along well together. We're on the same page, on enough stuff that, the business side of it is easy.
Yeah.
But we also, we're older now and, a little more level-headed, a little bit more mature. So, if we do disagree on something, it's not, the end of the world. You talk it through and you figure out what works best for everybody. And then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we're going to do that then. So, and, Guy, I had never really gotten to know very much. I'd met him a couple times over the years, but, it's been awesome getting to connect with Guy and share the stage with him and, just hang out and get to know him, long distance at this point. We have Zoom meetings so that we can talk about stuff and just hang out. But,
that's cool.
It's awesome. It's awesome.
That's awesome. I love that. That's exciting to hear. I love that you guys are all probably, not only getting to perform these songs and make people happy, but I'm sure it's just as fulfilling for you guys to be, on the stage again and like you said, reconciled in a way, the way it probably should be, So it's really beautiful.
And like I said earlier, it's mind blowing that, like Vanishing Lessons turned 30 last year.
God.
And people still want to hear that stuff. I mean, I like it. I'm proud of it, but it's like, wow, these people they're singing these songs. They like this stuff.
That's
and
awesome.
Even further back, even the Stop the Bleeding stuff, the pathogenic psychosurgery, they're all in,
Yeah.
And
that's exciting.
When you're recording it, you're not thinking about 30 years down the line. You're just thinking, we gotta make a record so we can go play this summer.
Yeah.
Now it's like, wow, we made that record 30 years ago, so we get to play this summer.
That's so cool. That's rad. And you mentioned earlier you're playing with Vengeance Rising soon as well. Bring me through that real quickly.
So when I was still living in California, I had connected with Roger Dan Martin. He had a Reign of Glory show, and wasn't sure if Robin was going to be able to make it. So he asked me if I'd fill in on that. And I was very flattered. I had no idea Roger Dale Martin knew who I was.
Oh, wow.
And it meant that I'd get to play with Jim Chapman.
He's amazing. So he's incredible.
I was like, if it doesn't work out, if Robin can't make it, I'll totally do it. So in the meantime, I moved to Nashville, and as I'm making the move, I get a text. Yeah, Robin can't make it. You're it. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. So I literally moved to Nashville and had to learn an entire album, so that I could, perform it. And so no rehearsal, it just didn't work out to rehearse, did a whole, show with them and, it was fun. It was good. And, I got along well with Roger, got along well with Nick. Chaffin, I've known,
yes.
I can say no, and that makes it sound like we're besties. We've been acquainted for a long, long time. That was the most time we'd ever spent together. And he's a pleasure to work with.
Yeah, he's incredible. Yeah.
But, Roger had expressed interest in working together more. So fast forward to now, and, my wife and I live here. We go to sanctuary gatherings at Pastor Bob's, and, so I know a lot more people now. So I see Glenn Mancaruso, fairly often. And I get this text from him asking if I think I could handle the stuff from the first two Vengeance records. And I was like, yeah, sure, I can totally do that. In the back of my head, I'm like, I don't sing like that. At the same time, I'm like, I like a challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not looking for a band. I mean, I somehow wound up back in a band that I wasn't even looking to be in, and I'm happy about that. But I don't need to be in another band. But one-off, sure, I'll do that. So, a couple days after that, I'm in a group FaceTime chat with, Doug and Larry and Pastor Bob and Roger and Glenn about, doing the show. And so, yeah, end of July at Immortal Fest, I will be
double duty, bro.
I will be, because I wouldn't be
the other one?
Immortal Fest because the Tourniquet show is a standalone.
Oh,
so we're playing, we're June 7th. Immortal Fest is July 25th, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, the last day of the festival, I will be doing my best to deliver, the Vengeance experience.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah. It's a little scary. I've been really focused on the Tourniquet stuff because of the Sweden show we just did. But now that I'm home, I'm, kind of diving into the Vengeance stuff. I still don't know what I'm going to do, but it'll be fun. Like I said, I like a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. How did that make you feel that they asked you?
Again, I'm flattered. I mean, yes, I joined what we'll consider one of the OG Christian thrash bands, but partly just because of geography, because, I live in the Bay Area and everybody else was, down in Southern California. But also just, for a lot of other reasons, I never felt like I was, part of the scene. I always felt, kind of scene adjacent. And so for one of the OG bands to say, hey, will you fill in for us and take care of the vocals? And for them to kind of treat me like they think I'm also an OG, it's kind of cool.
Yeah. It's amazing. I love that. I'm happy for you.
I texted Jimmy Brown. I'm like, okay, I sang for Tourniquet. Now I'm going to do Vengeance. You have to let me front a Deliverance show so I get the trifecta.
Dude, that's insane.
He's like, I don't think so.
That's incredible, though. Man, I'm so happy for you. That's really exciting, and I can tell in your voice how excited you are for that, and that's just really, really, it's a blessing, being able to do what you're be able to do and be a part of these, people's lives. Like, music's influenced so many people, so it's like you're getting to be a part of it. And I know, for you, it's just, I'm sure you view it as a blessing. I know that. I can tell.
Totally. I mean, I'm scared to death of doing the Vengeance Rising thing, but that's half the fun. But
you gotta get a wig, though. You gotta get a big wig.
Yeah, I just want to do cool things with cool people.
Yes.
Yeah. And that said, I'm going to kind of be, choosy. I don't want to, I'm going to sound really pretentious when I say this. I don't want to water down my brand, quote unquote. I don't want to just take everything. Yeah. But, when it's cool people that are friends and when it's cool music that I like, I'm not going to say no to that. Yeah. And again, I mean, partly just by virtue of where we live now, but also, I guess because of how long I've been, in this world of Christian, music and Christian metal, I've gotten to do so much cool stuff, I've recorded a couple tracks with Blamed. I got to do a backing vocal on the Kills record for Jamie, all these things. I mean, 16-year-old me back in, a tiny little town in outside of San Francisco is freaking out, because these are all the awesome people. I was buying these records and listening to these people, and now they're like, hey, will you sing on this one? Yeah. I mean, it's cool. And yeah, it is a blessing. And I don't take any of it for granted. Every time an opportunity comes up, it's like, wow, I get to do this again. This is awesome.
That's so cool.
Very thankful. Very fortunate.
That is incredible. I love hearing that. Yeah, man, I'm excited for you. I know you can't predict the future, but what do you think the future looks like for you overall?
Hopefully I'm just going to keep, making cool music with cool people, stop the bleeding. We hope we can start calling ourselves Tourniquet again soon. And, we want to play more shows. We'll see what else comes from that. Like I said, I have an album written. I just got to work out the logistics with Chris so that we can make that happen. And I'm always looking for, some cool opportunity, whether it's, writing with somebody, doing a backing vocal or whatever. I just, I like being part of this, and I like that I get to still contribute at some level. Maybe my reach isn't as wide as it was, in the 90s, but, there's still something satisfying in creating something, and releasing it, so that when you write it, it's yours. When you record and release it, it's everyone else's. Yeah. And it's cool to see, good, bad, or otherwise, how it's received. Because sometimes when they're not poorly received, that's just as valid as when people love it. Because it's still educational and it still informs what comes after it. So I'm happy that I still get to pursue creative stuff and try and make my mark.
That's awesome. I love that. That's awesome to hear. And yeah, absolutely, man. You've impacted a lot of people in terms of your music and your career and all that stuff. So, thank you for that, part of it. I know discovering Tourniquet for me as a kid was mind-boggling, and it was just cool to follow the band over the years. And I just really appreciate your time, and I'm just really honored you'd take time to hang with me and talk me through your history and hopefully your potential futures.
Hey, thank you, listener, for tuning in again and again. I really, really appreciate it. It's been an honor to have you along on this ride. So thank you so much for that. If you'd like to add me on Instagram and Facebook at The Rumors Are True Cast. If you'd like to like and subscribe, you know the drill. Got some merch on merchia.com. There is a link in the link tree if you're interested in that. Thank you so much to Luke Easter. So honored to have you on and talk shop. It's been so cool to get to know you over the last couple months. So I really appreciate all your time, Luke Easter. Got some incredible artists on the horizon, guys, and you know it. Nostalgia is still a heck of a drug. The podcast is produced by Wesley Hill, artwork by Jared Chase Bowser, and music by Brian Jaron. This episode is dedicated to the memory of my dear friend, producer, and man of many talents, Brian Jaron.